Wahed helps you become a halal investor in minutes. Clients from over 40 states have already started their journey with us. Here's how it works. First, we ask you 8 simple questions to recommend a portfolio based on your risk profile. You then select your portfolio and simply sign up online. Your account can be approved in seconds. After you fund your account, we'll place the trades for you. All you have to do then is sit back and monitor your performance. It actually is that easy.
Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon all of our viewers watching. This is Saeed with Psychology of Spirituality in collaboration with the Muslim Vibe. Very happy to be sitting here today with Brother Hooman Keshvarzi, who is the founding director of the Khalil Center, which is the largest provider of Muslim mental health in the United States. Being someone who studies psychology at a PhD level, it's a conversation I've been waiting for. And it's amazing to see the shift in our culture and Muslim Americans beginning to accept mental health treatment and understanding mental health treatment. So right off the bat, Brother Hooman, what is clinical psychotherapy for many of the viewers who may not be familiar with what it is?
Yeah, clinical psychology or psychotherapy is essentially it's a modality or a discipline that treats mental health. So psychology is the science of human behavior. Yes. Clinical psychology is looking at abnormal human behavior. Yes. And if we get a little bit more specific, it's our thinking, emotions, and behavior. And now there's like a push for the incorporation of a fourth category, which is spirituality, which interestingly enough, the history of psychology is that the etymology of the word itself, psychology is the science of the soul. So once upon a time, it was thought to be the science or the discovery of that which we don't really see, and contrasted with, say, a hard science like medicine,
geology,
or biology or whatnot, where you are dealing with the body. This is dealing with the psyche, which is sort of more of this metaphysical kind of idea, in fact. The age-old discussion of mind and body problem, for example, kind of addresses this issue of we're really working with the sort of metaphysical. Interestingly enough, actually, Abu Zayd al-Balkhi, rahimahullah ta'ala, he has this book called The Sustenance of the Soul and the Body, Al-Masalih al-Anfus wal-Abdan. It's the sustenance of the soul and the body. So this is a 9th century work, by the way, that was written by a Muslim theologian, polymath. He was an expert of various different fields. Geography being actually a specialty, and he had the cursory kind of writings, the Risala, which really addresses this, which is, I think, the first manuscript actually discovered or written on the topic of psychology, which isn't really found in your history books, unfortunately.
I think it's really interesting the shift we've been seeing in the field of psychology starting to incorporate spirituality and understanding that for more holistic well-being, holistic mental health, people incorporate a spiritual aspect. And a lot of it has been secularized with mindfulness, which is kind of like present moment awareness. A lot of those concepts come from Buddhism, but kind of the work that I do at the University of Houston. And my candidacy going forward will be trying to understand how spirituality impacts well-being in the Muslim American community. So I'll be taking a sample of college students and trying to understand how throughout the month of Ramadan, which is a very highly spiritual month, whether stress goes down, whether facets of well-being increase. So I would love to hear about what your role at the Khalil Center is, and even what the shift you've seen at being in the forefront of this wave of psychotherapy and Islamic spirituality. If you can just share your thoughts on that.
Yeah. This movement of spirituality is entitled usually like spiritually integrated psychotherapy. There's some leading figures in this particular domain, some of which actually are clinical director in the Bay Area, Dr. Rania, or her mentors, like Harold Koenig, for example, Kenneth Pargamot,
He does
for
really good
example.
work,
Scott Richards, individuals that are really involved with the spiritually integrated psychotherapy movement. And their hypothesis or idea is that you really can't separate the human being from physical, behavioral parts to spirituality and do this sort of clean dichotomy or cutoff or line between you being spirit and psyche or body or physical, and one needs to be treated by an imam or spiritual healer, and then the other one needs to be treated by a psychologist. Human beings are one thing, and human psychology is impacted by spirituality as well. And so what they've been doing is to show that spirituality works in alleviating psychological distress and mental health sicknesses. I mean, there's lots of studies. It's a protector in substance abuse. It alleviates depression and anxiety. The greater the religious coping, the lower the mental health symptoms. It plays a role.
It has lots of correlations with moderating variables.
Yeah, exactly.
A sense of purpose in life, which is a huge implication. People who have sense of purpose and a meaning in life usually do a lot better, and spirituality really gives that to people.
Right. Yeah. And spiritually integrated or spiritually oriented interventions are also shown to be empirically evidence that they work. And in fact, sometimes they work much better than normative, non-spiritually integrated interventions. There's actually a study that found that they did a survey of folks that were being treated in the hospital, a psychiatric hospital, for the mental health condition. And they took two groups, split them apart, gave one group spiritually oriented kind of therapy. The other group, they gave them secular therapy. They followed them up, and they found that both groups recovered. So then they followed up both groups to ask them, what was it about the psychotherapy that worked? What did you do that helped? Well, one group said, the spiritually integrated psychotherapy was very helpful for me to, kind of make new connections, reinterpret my suffering, and it was helpful for them to treat their psychopathology. The other group, the secular group, interestingly enough, they said they went home and they prayed to God to cure them of this disease.
The part that was missing.
They went home and they were thinking about God. They were trying to reinterpret and make meaning. And they said that had the most impact on their psychopathology, on treat alleviation, which is ironic because it was actually secular psychotherapy. So majority of individual studies show cope with psychological distress through religion and spirituality. Majority of Americans do, Muslim and non-Muslim. So, I mean, it kind of makes sense that as Muslims belonging to a spiritual tradition, to Islam as Muslims, that we embrace that and to actually exemplify that and to demonstrate that our tradition of Muslim scholarship, was doing this for generations, and that this isn't something new to us.
I think right now, a lot of people, many Muslims have the masjid as like their main source of support in the community. They may not necessarily know where to go for psychological support, so they kind of go to the imam to kind of for that spiritual guidance, but also questions on things that the imam might not be competent about. So do you think that having this relationship where perhaps incorporating psychological services, perhaps even in the masjid or in these centers where the imam can work on the spiritual aspect and the psychologist or the psychotherapist can work on the mental health related, is that kind of aligned with some of the work that you guys do at the Khalil Center?
Right, yeah, absolutely. I think you're describing sort of like collaborative care, right?
Yes.
Collaborative care between being able to work with first responders, I would call them, imams who serve as first responders or theologians or spiritual practitioners, chaplains even, and then, mental health providers. And I think the collaboration is really significant and important, and we do that. In fact, at our office, in our center, we have theologians. We have like a religious consultation department, actually. So we have, like in Chicago, Maulana Bilal sits in, he has his own office, and Sheikh Rami has an office where somebody might come in and ask about, is my marriage done or not from like an Islamic perspective? What are ethical things that I need to be considering, or more theologically oriented kind of concerns or questions that come up in the therapy that, your psychologist isn't your theologian that's giving you religious education, but rather what they're doing is they're working with you to help you with your psychological suffering and distress and help you better relate to yourself and healing that way. So that's why we have that kind of component where we actually have individuals, can get that help as well. With the imams, it's important to build relationships. I think it's about building relationships and recognizing that what we need to do as a community is to really educate the Muslim community about the differentiation of different spaces and places
really
where
important.
different services are provided. So the fact that people go to the masjid for mental health treatment is it does not necessarily mean that we should start providing mental health services off the minbar or like in the imam's corner.
A lot of times it's informal. People are
Right.
not necessarily knowing that they have anxious symptoms. That's one thing.
Right.
It's just
That's
kind
a
of
good
like
point. That's a really good point.
They don't even mention those terms, but the advice that the imam
Yeah.
is giving is informally
Right,
some
right,
sort
right.
of a mental health
Yeah.
advice, even
Agreed,
though it's not quantified as that. Yeah.
No, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
And that's what I think that furthers the education piece.
Yeah.
Because part of what Khalil Center is doing is that we have like a Muslim mental health first responder certification training that we've been doing for the past year and a half across the nation. We've educated over like 600, 700 community leaders and imams across the country now. So what we do is we show them, the imam, how they can identify certain psychological conditions and symptoms. What they can do, because they can be a part of that treatment process, as you said,
Yes.
dealing with spiritual issues, giving fatwas, dealing with their marital, like getting them married, and if they need to get divorced, and facilitating that, that sort of thing. These religious rites and rituals, they're necessary to be dealt with, perhaps in the masjid and with the imam, but that they know. And then we also give them a framework of collaboration. What is their role, and how can they work with mental health providers and centers like Khalil Center? How can they be involved in the process? So it's about educating them, because all imams, I find oftentimes they're sort of like victimized. They're doing like, they're doing this wrong, and why are they, But the issue is that we just, rather than sort of like seeing them as a problem, we need to provide them and work with them towards a solution, to say, here's what we do, and here's how we can help, and here's how it can help you. I find that imams actually find that so reassuring. They're happy to take that load off of their backs, and to have actually a framework of how to do that. So it's education on two fronts. It's educating the educators, right?
And the ummah.
Specialized, right? I think addressing mental health is about addressing the different levels of care.
Yeah.
So we have prevention, we have community intervention, we have different practitioners, chaplains and whatnot, imams. And then the other is to actually set the culture and tone for our community, to tell them, like, would it, if the Muslim community happened to be going to the imam for carpentry, would we just be like, the imam should learn how to learn how to like make desks and fix stuff? Like, no, we'd say, okay, the people don't really know what carpentry is about, and that imams don't get any training or modules in carpentry. It's not part of their syllabus.
Unless you're Jesus, right? Unless you're Isa.
There's actually a study in New York City that finds that Muslims believe, they endorse the survey to show that they believe that imams are counselors. When, I myself am going through like a traditional madrasa curriculum, and trust me, there's no counseling like course, in that curriculum. You deal with like the fiqh of marriage, right, and fiqh of talaq, right? And how you get married and how you get divorced, and what kinds of statements you might say that might create a divorce and whatnot. You study you don't really study, now how are you going to fix a marriage when it breaks down? You know what I'm saying?
There's so many moving parts to mental health, which is why the education portion is a little bit difficult, because a lot of it's situational. A lot of people they may have anxiety, they may have depression, they may just not be living up to their full potential. So addressing the people watching, what are some important tidbits that they can apply in better understanding mental health and where they are and how they can kind of maybe even self-identify some things that they may not be aware of?
Yeah, I think just kind of touching upon this whole legacy of this tradition we have, building from within the tradition, we can say that, and oftentimes when we think of mental health, people sort of can be kind of uncomfortable with it, that it can be highly stigmatized. And I agree that there's actually some truth to that, meaning that the way that mental health treatment is offered today in the mainstream, whether it be reductionism or a complete opposite of postmodern theories, or whether it be pharmaceutically driven kind of like medical model type like interventions, all of those have their appropriate, at least the medical model, and reductionism has its place, but
it's not capturing the whole picture.
Right, it's not capturing the whole picture and the dominant. So we have reason to be concerned and skeptical, and there's I think psychiatrists, one study I had found showed the psychiatrists are among the least religious individuals. And in mental health settings, we also have a great degree of bias and prejudice towards like spirituality or religiously oriented individuals, likely to psychopathologize them if they have religious beliefs and
delusions of grandeur and things
all sorts of things. Now, there is reason to be concerned, but we have to look at this, and this is what Khalil Center is trying to do, is to say what we're doing is reclaiming our tradition. Rather than, we're not a mouthpiece for mental health, mainstream behavioral mental health science. What we want to do is reform how mental health is offered. And we want to reform it, giving insights, shedding light onto it, right, pun intended, nur, onto really the darkness of looking at things in the absence of any sort of spirituality. So why I mention that is because our tradition has this differentiation of spaces and this built-in, the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ, that indeed I was only sent to perfect good character, right? And Imam al-Ghazali, he quotes a hadith at the beginning, which the strength of it isn't very strong, so at best it's at least a staying. إِذَا أَرَادَ اللَّهُ بِعَبْدِهِ خَيْرًا بَصَّرَهُ بِعُيُوبِ نَفْسِهِ. If God wants good for a believer, for his slave, then he will give him awareness of his own deficiencies. So now Imam al-Ghazali goes on to say, the way to do that is to find a mentor, or a sheikh from mashayikhihi, from that sort of tazkiyat al-nafs, a sheikh al-Rabbani, somebody who's an expert in facilitating spiritual health and healing. And then and then Abu Zayd al-Balkhi essentially resonating, saying the same thing. Everybody should go to a hakim, so he's using kind of different language. Go to get wise counsel. For example, Abu Bakr al-Razi has a little risala on psychology, and he says people should, in order for you to perfect your own traits and qualities and behaviors, you have to get supervision. You have to see it from the outside. So
people look at Freud as the father of psychology, but this is embedded within our narrative.
Absolutely. I did this dars actually of Abu Zayd al-Balkhi's risala. It's only like 75 pages in Arabic. You read it; it's translated, right? You could get it.
Put it in the description.
Yeah, Malik Badri actually translated it, and it's a good translation, mashallah. His work is like completely applicable today. It's as if he wrote it today. Wow. The OCD, Dr. Rania did a study of this. She found that the OCD symptomatology, according to the DSM-5, is exactly 100% converges with the symptomology and checklist that Abu Zayd al-Balkhi qualifies as OCD.
Centuries ago.
1,000 years ago, right? And he writes in there, and mind you, this is why, when I read it, when I taught this, actually I taught a portion of it in Turkey this summer. When I taught it, I was really qualifying the context in which he's talking, how this is really holistic. When he's talking about mental health and psyche, he introduces the concept of spirituality, of waswasa from shaitan, and then he's talking about biological kind of origins, heredity, predisposed heredity. It's all holistic. So their mind, the way that they operate it, is that Islam, one of my mentors says that Islam completes knowledge. It doesn't dismantle it. It appropriates knowledge, right? Empiricism is a source of knowledge, according to our Aqidah.
Yes.
But we don't divorce it from wahi. So how can people make themselves better? In a nutshell, really, you have to have mentorship. You might have spiritual mentorship, and you might have mentorship through somebody who, actually Ghazali says there's two types. One is the traditional modality of going to a sheikh, and then the other modality is رفيقا صالحا عالما بأسرار هذا الأمر, that he says a pious companion who knows the intricacies of these affairs, meaning like he knows how to facilitate. So this could mean somebody who's sort of like an expert, or somebody who's a little bit more up there that can help you gain awareness into your own behaviors.
Are there hadiths, stories even about people in the Ummah seeking counseling of that sort? Because we know mental health has always been around. It's just that we didn't know what it was. We just called people crazy.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the seerah is completely replete with. If we look at it holistically, the seerah is completely replete with the people coming to the Prophet ﷺ with all of their concerns, whether it's alcoholism and they're asking for guidance on that. A woman came with epilepsy, and she was having seizures, a Habashi woman, and she came to the Prophet ﷺ, an Ethiopian woman, right, from Africa. She had come to a Sahabiya had come to the Prophet ﷺ and said that I have these seizures, what can I do? So he would, and there's numerous stories. So I don't kind of dwell on each story. The Prophet ﷺ gives the dua, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-hammi wal hazani, right? That, oh Allah, I seek refuge from sadness and anxiety and depression, right? Depression and anxiety, right? He has an intricacy of the way that he deals with people based upon their context. There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. That inni umirtu an ukallima an-nasa ala qadri uqulihim, that I've been instructed to talk to individuals in accordance with their states or intellects. So now you have, for example, an old man that comes to the Prophet ﷺ and says, "Can I, what do you think about me touching my wife and just kissing her and hugging her during the fast of Ramadan?" And he tells him, "No, don't do that," right? And then he has an older man come in later and he says, "Yeah," and so we're observing two different statements to the same person. So this is an intricacy of dealing with people in accordance with where they're at and considering their psychological states when we are giving them some sort of, direction or guidance, because the Prophet ﷺ giving two different things to two different people, one could say, "Oh, well, how do I reconcile that with a black and white lens on truth?" Right? What do you mean? It's either right or wrong, you know what I'm saying? And so, but no, the Prophet ﷺ had an intricacy in the way that he would talk to people, how he turned to people. So there's a whole study that can go into this, and some of which what we're trying to do is to really examine the life of the Prophet ﷺ and his interactions with the Sahaba and the Tabi'een and the Salaf al-Salihin, to see what can we, extract from this tremendous tradition to be able to inform, the way that we might work on ourselves and help others. Imam al-Ghazali says that he actually, Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu, Ghazali brings this in his Ihya, under the chapter of Bain al-Khawfi wal-Raja, between fear and hope. He says the individual, the alim is not an individual that just randomly gives reprimands and scares or induces healthy anxiety, I would say, to an individual. Nor is he one that gives them hope. He says he gives it in accordance with what they need, right? So that's the intricacy of it. He's saying he doesn't just give it according to random prescriptions of this is the hukum, this is what's right. You know, even in fiqh they say that the usul al-ifta, like the procedure of giving a fatwa, it's bad practice actually to just give a fatwa to somebody.
You have to specialize it according to.
You have to give it in accordance with the context. You have to examine the context in order to give the. So there's a great degree of nuance in looking at the Prophet ﷺ. And even the Prophet ﷺ says, looking at the idea of bias, right? He's saying that a qadi shouldn't give advice in or shouldn't rule over a case when he is angry. And then other fuqaha say it's not just anger. The illah, the common denominator here, is that anything that might cause bias, right? Yeah. Anything that might cause him to stray from objectivity. So now we're thinking about context of countertransferences and internal reactions. I'm working with somebody. I'm having a reaction. I need to pull that back.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
A lot of the work of psychotherapy is trying to do that. Yeah.
So like this is all of this. Our scholars have written this, and so I think what we're trying to do is actually do ittisal, connect the science back to our turath al-Islamiyya, because we have a period of time during colonialism where we have become munqati', we have disconnected natural sciences and academia from spirituality, from Islamic sciences, when they actually go hand in hand, right? There is no division. It's a false dichotomy. And what we're trying to do is to actually bring it back. And, Dr. Rajab, who's the head of Ibn Khaldun University, whom I work for actually in Turkey, he says that Muslims must basically be chains or consider themselves as contributors to the Islamic intellectual legacy. And what you get in school in a PhD program in psychology is a European intellectual legacy.
Yeah.
You've got all of their theories, all of their history, down to the nuance and the specificity of like how you deal with people. But what was happening in the Muslim world? Like, we don't have anything. Nobody talked about this
tradition.
You know what I'm saying? And so that's where we're saying, look, let's revive this. This isn't so foreign. And now, each person, we have to create the culture of people seeking help to fix their character, to learn ta'aleem, to have ilm for medical treatment, for their spirituality, right? For the educational needs. All of these things, we even have spaces for them within our Islamic tradition, right? We have spaces. Yes. We have the hospitals. We had mental hospitals. We had traveling physicians. We had community health. I mean, these are things that we need to sort of get back and say, look, they all interconnect.
Yes. And
industrialism, what it's done is to disconnect everything from anything. So doctors don't like psychologists. Psychologists don't like psychiatrists. Academics don't like applied practitioners. Even within psychology, this school of thought doesn't talk to this other school of thought because they're like, you're wrong and I'm right, and you're wrong and I'm right. I mean, we have we have like madhahib, even on something as objective as you would say is divine truth of ethics. There's got to be a right and wrong. We say it's not that simple actually. Even when it comes to like,
it's like a cognitive error that we just have as humans.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because lots of these things that we've known in our traditions are only starting to come out in the psychological literature in the Western world. Mm-hmm. And now it's only now that many of these secular, possibly atheist psychologists, mental health workers, even scientists are starting to understand spirituality and its
Sure.
major implications.
Absolutely.
And I don't want to say they're trying to co-opt it, but there's a book by Sam Harris, who's like one of the most prominent atheists, called "Waking Up: Spirituality Without Religion."
Oh,
So they're
wow,
trying to separate. They're trying to separate the two because they see that in science, spirituality is being substantiated and implicated as
Right.
being very beneficial. So I can talk to you, Brother Hooman, for another hour.
Yes, wow.
This is a conversation I've been waiting for a very long time. Just having another Muslim PhD, someone who's well versed in psychology and spirituality. Maybe the last thing you can share for our viewers is many youth, even many people, are having spiritual conflicts. They're having doubts of God. They're having intra-conflicts on whether they should adopt spirituality. What's something that you can share with them on the importance of understanding their spirituality and reclaiming their spirituality?
I think, what spirituality you quoted, because we have to kind of understand the context. If you're talking about like intellectually trying to satisfy themselves, I think it's being better acquainted to be able to champion their own legacy, right? So being able to understand and look at some of our scholarship and our literature to be able to really find a sense of identity, purpose, and pride in the fact that this is the legacy I come from. This is the heritage.
It supports science. It supports all of these different things.
Yeah. And then, but if we're talking about more kind of spiritual practice and identity, I think we're in an era of the like me generation and everything is sort of industrialized, and I think the true Islamic communal kind of structure was such that everybody was in the pursuit of personal growth, right? That that the best of you are those who are greatest in taqwa, right?
God consciousness.
Right, and so there was this idea that we need to kind of strive towards developing these. There's this whole context of like tahdhib al-akhlaq, like character reformation, and so in that regard, I think it's indispensable to be connected to the connected. Murabata, right? Being connected to the connected is being able to find righteous, close companions, friends, and mentors, and being able to kind of benefit from that companionship and help. And they say al-muslimu mirat al-mu'min, right? That al-mu'minu mirat al-mu'min, right? That a believer is a mirror to another believer, and so they kind of can reflect the goods and the bads that they might, have. So I think the companionship, also the name of Khalil Center comes from that. It's like, there's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that says, "Al-mar'u ala dini khalilihi falyanzur ahadukum mimman yukhalilu." That a believer, a person is upon the way, deen. Deen in the Arabic language also means way, literally, of their Khalil. Khalil is like a very close, intimate friend where you share your personal secrets with, right? Khalilihi falyanzur. So all of you shall be mindful of whom you take as your Khalil, as your close companion. So that's the name of Khalil Center. We're trying to kind of be Khalils for others. And so people need to have a Khalil, or Khalils.
I totally agree. The work that you guys do is amazing. We will put the links in the description if people can learn more about the Khalil Center. We'll put the hyperlink in the description. I want to thank Brother Hooman Keshvarzi for being on today's episode with the Muslim Vibe and sharing to our viewers some very, very important details on mental health and the convergence of our Islamic tradition and psychotherapy and psychology. I think a really big takeaway is that, science and these practices that we try to separate, a lot of it has been forced down upon us. There isn't a separation. Islam is holistic. It understands science, the rational science, the hard science, and soft science as being under the umbrella of our deen. Thank you, Brother Hooman.
A pleasure.
Appreciate it so much. We'll see you guys in the next episode. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wahed helps you become a halal investor in minutes. Clients from over 40 states have already started their journey with us. Here's how it works. First, we ask you 8 simple questions to recommend a portfolio based on your risk profile. You then select your portfolio and simply sign up online. Your account can be approved in seconds. After you fund your account, we'll place the trades for you. All you have to do then is sit back and monitor your performance. It actually is that easy.